Well, Monica, Kristin, it is great to be with you here today. Thrilled to be talking about Quona Capital with you and the wonderful work that you guys do. Not only that, but also to talk about the wonderful returns that you're giving your investors, which I think for many of us is equally important. So why don't we begin, if we could, with you just telling us a little bit about the history of Quona Capital and about where it is today and how you see yourselves positioned in the marketplace. So all three of those things, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and love to talk to you about Quona Capital. I'm Monica Brand Engel, co-founder and managing partner of Quona. And Quona is a venture firm focused on fintech for inclusion in emerging markets. All of those words give you the exact focus of our strategy. And it's because we believe that there is no single tool more powerful than financial inclusion for radically improving economic opportunity for the underserved. Our history was born on a partner platform called Acción. We were managing a portfolio at that point that was financed by a very successful exit in Mexico called Compartamos. It was a company I was working with while living in Mexico, helping launch new financial products for the underserved. And that IPO was the single most successful one that Credit Suisse ever underwrote in Latin America. But we were still realizing that we had more to do. This was 2007, when not only were we on the cusp of the global financial crisis, interestingly and maybe contrarily, we had M-Pesa in Kenya totally changing the financial landscape of digital access in an African country, while in the United States, Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. So crazy as it might sound, these four events, and personally, I actually had my twins that year, but this idea that we have innovative mobile phone use and discovery, which now seems almost trite, but it was actually a new thing in 2007, eve of the financial crisis, and in Kenya, showing in a very surprising place, unexpected place, that sometimes world changing innovation can happen in unexpected places, all with this proceeds we had of the IPO, launched the predecessor of Quona, Frontier Investments, which really and gave us a thesis of how can we use technology to improve access for the underbanked. I'm going to pause, and I'm sorry that was a long answer, and I forgot the two other parts of the question. You
Quite all
said
right.
history.
You got where we wanted you to be, so thank you.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Monica, thank you for that. If you could tell us about how you think about the team that you've built and how the team's background evolved over time, if it did, or tell us about how the team's background informs your investment making decision and your impact assessment.
I love that question about our team and the evolution, because we have a phrase at Quona and it's really existential. We call it one Quona, and we are the we, because we all are trying to build something bigger than ourselves. And it's very improbable. In fact, many of our initial investors, including JP Morgan and TIA, who joined Acción as our anchor investors in Fund One, said venture has to be local. You can't do a global venture firm. It was very surprising. And it's actually because of the team. And I'll start with my co-founder, Jonathan Whittle, who himself has a characteristic that is true of most of the team at Quona, that we all are operators or have experience starting, scaling, and exiting financial service and tech companies in emerging markets. We also all are subject matter experts. All of us have experience working in fintech. So that notion of being deeply embedded and connected to our markets, not just because we're operators, we actually, another fun fact about Quona, among the 30 people that make up Quona, we speak 20 languages. So many of us were born, raised families, went to school, or have built companies in these markets. So for us, this is much more than a job. It really is a vocation, and we work in markets that we care deeply about. And interestingly, even though we have these things in common, subject matter expertise, global, local, and a passion for impact, what's beautiful about Quona is how diverse we are. So in addition to Jonathan and me, we brought in a third co-founder, Ganesh, who covers Asia, Ganesh Rangaswamy. And even if you just look at the founding team, I think we represent, between us and our spouses, maybe like 6 religions, multiple languages, lived and traveled in multiple parts of the world. And again, that diversity is actually what is our power. This idea of seeing behind corners and seeing things that people miss.
That's fantastic, and there really is power in diversity. diversity of thought, diversity of character, diversity of background. So it's always
100%.
wonderful to see that in motion in real life. One question I wanted to follow up on there is when you think about the lived experience of the people on your team and the importance of that, and it seems like it is very important to you. How does that inform your decision making as an investment shop?
That's another great question. And actually, again, I want to highlight something that's not unique only to Quona, but I think something we're very proud of. We have a participatory decision-making process. And that starts with every Monday, we start with a team meeting where everyone's invited, from every investment officer to the people who do payroll and collect accounts payable. We really believe that understanding
Mm,
what our core business is and being of service to our entrepreneurs is really what binds us. That Thursday is when we have our investment committee and all partners have a vote. So this idea of actually giving voice, not just seeking opinion,
mm.
but actually giving weight, it really think makes everyone think very carefully about what they say and how they engage, because all of us are accountable. Kristin, I know you were looking to say something too.
Well, I was just going to add, and I think that it goes well with what you just said. So, from if we want to take the portfolio company perspective on, how Quona's expertise is kind of differentiated, um, that global local approach that Monica talked about really comes through when we survey our portfolio companies. We do an annual survey in which we assess, kind of satisfaction from our companies and try to better understand how we can support our portfolio companies. Through that, we track, our NPS and other metrics. First of all, we're really proud to have a year-on-year increase in NPS. Our NPS last year was 87 from our portfolio companies, so really strong satisfaction from our portfolio companies. And one of the common themes that came through in the
Kristen,
qualitative
sorry,
feedback.
can I interrupt you there? I don't think everyone's going
Sure.
to know what an NPS is.
Great, you're right. So we track every year a net promoter score, which is a way of measuring customer satisfaction. And it's actually a really tough score. It ranges from negative 100 to 100. And so we have a score of 87 on that 200-point scale. And we're really proud to have seen that rise year on year over the past 4 years as we've been doing this annual feedback. And I think to kind of answer the question a little bit more specifically, one of the common themes that came through in that feedback and continues to come through every year from our portfolio founders in terms of what really sets Quona apart relative to the other investors on their cap table is this global local approach, the ability for the Quona partners on their board to better understand parallels in other emerging markets and kind of learn from that and share those learnings. And I think the attitude that the Quona team takes, as Monica mentioned, this is a not just a job for a lot of our team. We're all very passionate about it, and I think that comes through in the feedback. The way that we show up as partners for our portfolio companies seems to really resonate, and it's clear that they believe that we have their backs and are investing in them out of conviction.
So important. Monica, I want to pivot a little bit to returns and how you think about, or let me say it for the camera, Monica, how do you think about the returns that you're delivering for your investors? And how does that relate to the impact that you're trying to deliver?
Quona is very committed to being a point of light in demonstrating performance and purpose should have no trade-off. We have intentionally designed our strategy, both picking Fintech, which has tremendous tailwinds with demographic in terms of youth and younger generations being digitally native, as well as macroeconomic, and many of these countries having GDP growth that actually parallels that of the developed world, not to mention the digitization trends with mobile phone penetration and access to internet and the ability to have cloud computing. All of these are enormous tailwinds that drive why we picked Fintech and why we believe and have demonstrated we can be top quartile and deliver risk adjusted returns to our investors, our LPs. That track record really drives us and drives how we make decisions, how we pick companies to follow on, and how we partner with co-investors. It for us is fundamental. And the reason why is if you want to solve a problem as immense as world poverty, the only way you can do that is mobilizing a resource equally as immense, and that's the world's capital markets. And the world's capital markets will only come to the table if you're delivering a return.
Could not agree with you more, Monica.
And I think to add to that, so part of the impact evaluation lab's assessment was, the impact authenticity, but also the execution. And one of the things we're really proud of at Quona falls into that execution category. And this is our annual impact performance review, in which we rate portfolio company impact performance annually against the ABCs of impact. And for those that don't know, it was a framework developed by the Impact Management Project a few years ago, which basically classifies impact at a firm level and at a company level into a few categories: contributing to solutions, which is the highest level of impact; benefiting stakeholders, which is the middle level of impact; and avoiding harm, which is kind of baseline. And so we've been every year using our impact framework to plot portfolio company impact performance against the ABCs of impact. It's part of how we kind of assess which companies are moving up in impact, which companies are moving down. And part of that process every year is also understanding how and to what extent that is correlating with financial performance. And we can very confidently say that our strongest impact performers are also our strongest financial performers. There's very strong correlation there. And I think that's because of a lot of what Monica mentioned around, the ecosystems that we're investing in, fintech as a model, returns being compelling, and the ability for fintech in emerging markets to bring on, downstream capital. But there's very strong correlation between impact and returns for us.
And we certainly believe that that can be true, although it's also fair to say that for certain funds who choose to deliver a different kind of return, catalytic capital, it's totally appropriate as well.
Because we are investing in venture, where we are expecting these companies to grow, and they are required to grow and be able to raise that follow-on capital. I think it makes sense that there's a correlation there for venture specifically.
For sure. So, could I ask either or both of you the following question, which is, if you have clearly demonstrated that there need not be the so-called return give up or concessionary returns if you're having impact on the world, why is it that so many people seem to assume that that's the case?
Great question. I would say there's three reasons. One, people use the word impact investing very broadly. Rob, you just said yourself, some impact investors offer concessionary returns or more catalytic, but everyone uses this word impact. We don't differentiate. We don't have a taxonomy, which is why often Quona just describes itself as a venture firm focused on inclusive fintech. We don't use the word impact because sometimes people will mistake that or confuse that with other types of impact investing that is more catalytic and is more concessionary. So one is that the industry has not developed clear language and clear benchmarks that would differentiate a commercial impact investor from a concessionary one. That's the first reason. Secondly, I think for strategies like Quona, we are working in a category, an asset class, venture capital, as well as markets, emerging markets, that both have had some hard times. So venture right now, for example, there's a clog because the IPO markets, especially the ones in New York or London, have been backlogged. And so the exit and realizations have been slow in traditional venture capital. As a result, LPs' own portfolio are a little bit lopsided. So I think in general, there's just a question of how, if venture can deliver risk-adjusted returns, let alone impact venture. So I think part of it is an association with an asset class that has had some lumpiness again. But if you look over 30 years, there's no question on the success. If you look over 3 years, you might have some questions. So sometimes it's recency bias, we call that, of looking at things recently versus looking over history. That's the second reason. So the first reason around impact labels and the taxonomy that's clear that we still have to develop. Secondly, is that there's recency bias around venture. And other categories of impact that might make people not realize or confuse it in terms of capital. Three, I would just say it's awareness. And that's why I'm so grateful for this kind of podcast. Some people just, cannot believe. In fact, I'll quote one of my mentors. In fact, I heard him speak at my business school. He came, Warren Buffett, who described initially, he's changed his tune, but initially when he first discovered impact investing, and this is in 2017 or 2018, he called impact investing a houseboat. It's not a very good house. It's not a very good boat, which actually he said it didn't do well in either impact or investing, which of course we can show otherwise. But early days, it wasn't unfair. And I think it's getting aware and also really focusing. Not all impact investors are good investments. You have to really do your homework and really pick the ones that can demonstrate both authentic impact and real financial return.
It is exactly right. And that's one of the reasons that we designed our methodology the way we did, to reflect, as Kristin said earlier, the authenticity and the rigor with which you approach the problem, but also the financial returns that you generate. Kristin, that leads me to pivot a little bit. If I could ask you to talk a little bit about the experience that you had working with us, what drove you to want to have a collaboration and ultimately an assessment by the Impact Evaluation Lab.
In terms of working with IEL, we were really pleased to be, have inbound outreach from the IEL team in 2024. And it was really timely. It was shortly after we had done other verifications, and we had really just worked on organizing all of our data rooms and everything like that. So honestly, the process itself was really straightforward. And one of the things I appreciated about working with the IEL team was how collaborative the process was. We had a few different discussions, and part of that was not just, being really strict around what qualified as a yes score or a no score, but help them really wanting to understand what we meant by what was in the data room and our answers to the survey. Our intentions of working with YEL, I think, is part of what is related to what Monica was mentioning around, the development and maturity of the impact investing industry. So when Quona was formed and when Monica was leading the frontier investment groups, it was basically the Wild West in impact investing. There were a ton of impact investors, and there was a very wide range of what that meant. And there was a very wide range of how folks were measuring, if they were measuring at all. Everyone had proprietary frameworks. Everyone was measuring on their own accord, and folks were just expected to trust that. I think, the industry has come a long way in the past decade, 15 plus years. We're now part of an industry that has, a really robust set of best practices and standards around impact frameworks with the, impact principles, the 5 dimensions of impact, the Iris Plus metrics. And so now impact investors that are new to the scene, or those that have been around for a while, are able to say whether or not they are aligning with those best practices and frameworks. That said, it's also become a lot easier and appealing to become an impact investor in some ways. And so I think, part of why we found working with IEL to be compelling is because we find that while there are a lot of impact investors with authentic impact theses and ambitions, the measurement and accountability, or that execution and rigor piece that you were mentioning, is necessary to fight against impact washing and to continue to elevate the players that really are driving strong impact. And we felt that a verification through IEL would help provide a kind of gut check for us of the extent to which we were aligning, which we knew we were. I think the next wave of maturity around measurements and accountability seems to be pointing to impact outcomes, we think, and we're continuing to hear in discussions. We think this will be challenging to do at scale, but we at Quona are really excited about this kind of shift towards outcomes and impact, because we think it'll be able to help us further demonstrate the ability, with more proof of actual impact, the ability to both have impact and returns. And I'm realizing that I only partially answered that question, but it was in part, I think our intention to work with IEL is in part a response to the shifting maturity of the impact industry and our interest in having a third-party verification to demonstrate that we are leaders, in fact, in this space, and have someone come in, look through all of our systems, practices, but also our financial performance, and really understand if we're walking the talk.
That is exactly why we exist, Kristin. So I'm pleased to hear you say that.
Great.
One question I wanted to ask you both, if I could, is we are seeing a lot of noise in the United States, at least, around different kinds of investing, whether you want to call that socially responsible investing, ESG, impact, sustainability, whatever it is. How do you see that, if you do, as a headwind, and how are you addressing it?
That's a great question. I would start with differentiating, because I think, again, back to confusion, ESG and impact investing are two very, very different things. ESG has been around a long time, many decades, and it was really a risk framework that investors developed to make sure that there was good governance and some stewardship at the corporate level. Again, I won't speak about, why that has had political backlash. I think there has been some, and it's an important, I think, wake up call to make sure, and as Kristin beautifully said, that there's always authenticity in what you're doing. Because I do think, and she used the word kind of, I think, well, greenwashing, an equivalent to that, I think is very important. Because I think that's really what people reacted to, where it's the wrapping, not the person inside, that became the focus. So, so I think that's sort of separate from what Quona
Mm-hmm.
does. Quona does impact investing, and again, this and even that word. So back to your point, that's even some sustainability and other things are getting backlash, just because that big tent I described earlier, where some concessionary catalytic, but maybe better described as venture philanthropy or other words that could describe it, were labeled as impact
Mm-hmm.
investing. And so people felt like they had been had, right? Because investing without a return is a grant.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't call yourself what you're investing if you're not going to give a return. And it should be risk adjusted,
Mm-hmm.
because, again, in the way we think about it, remember I mentioned our first investors, in addition to Axion, were JP Morgan and TIA. That's the teacher's pension fund. My sister has spent her whole career and is still a public school educator. So I wake up every day saying, if I don't do my job, she doesn't retire. This is not about fun and feel good. This is real.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people sometimes, and maybe in the exuberance of wanting to believe that there's no trade-off, really maybe weren't as disciplined as I need to be to really make sure and be honest and authentic on both sides, on both the impact you're having and on financial performance. So one of the things that Quona is very proud of, and we get really good marks from our investors, is authenticity and truth in advertising. We are straight talking, we are data driven, and if you read our reports, there we can stand by every word of that proudly. And it's really because of the great work Kristin does in terms of really uh, diligencing. We had an investment committee call today where she was raising her hand and said, explain to me the impact thesis. It's not clear. And we do that every time we do an investment, as well as rigorously assess the financial performance. So the political backlash, like many things, I think will pass. Some of it's healthy. Some of it is healthy just in terms of really holding some folks accountable. Others are, I think, maybe just reactionary. Quona doesn't change. Quona's strategy, the way we speak, what we do, has been consistent for 10 years and it will continue to be. Nothing in the way we work will change, because we believe deeply that we are doing work that has empirical evidence, that is ground bottoms up, and that we can stand behind and validate through not only data that we collect, but through folks like you who assess us independently.
Fantastic, Monica. Thank you. Kristin, I want to explore an idea with you around impact measurement, if I
Mhm.
can. One of the issues that gets confused, I think, by many people who are trying to measure impact is the difference between precision and accuracy. How do you guys think about that?
It's a great question, and that's another place where I think we've benefited a little bit from some maturity in the impact industry. Like I said, I've been working on impact with Quona for 6 years now. The reporting requests that we've received from LPs over the past 6 years have evolved a lot, and I do think there is a deeper appreciation now for not precision for precision's sake, but accurate impact measurement that reflects the context of the impact that is happening. And so that is part of why we do not particularly love vanity metrics, or that's how I perceive them. Metrics that don't actually tell us anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's part of why I do think the caveat of all this is I do think um, from an impact measurement standpoint relative to my peers that are also impact heads of impact at other impact firms, our focus on financial inclusion having one, core impact goal does make things a little easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, but even with that, with one impact goal, every single company is nuanced. So it's when we are comparing impact metrics, at least at the output level, without the context of the company, the market that they're working in, really understanding the company performance over the last quarter, the last year, those metrics don't really say anything, which is part of why in our reporting, we really, really try hard to share that the impact KPIs, like I said, typically outputs, along with the context. And then when we do our annual impact performance review, it is really, really focused on categorical impact so that our investment teams are asked to rate impact performance within the context of that business model in that market and really understand if it really is a high, medium, or low on, for example, product depth and breadth,
Mm-hmm.
affordability, et cetera, because affordability means something entirely different for a challenger bank versus an MSME lender versus an embedded finance player. So I think probably not a direct answer to your question, but I think precision in terms of, exact number of lives touched, to me, that does not actually reflect the impact of a firm or a fund or a company. What really matters is understanding the depth of the impact that they're having, how that has, continued to improve year on year, how the actual customers are experiencing that. And that's part of why I mentioned output or outcomes earlier. We've really invested in trying to better understand how the end stakeholders of our companies are experiencing those products. We've worked with 60 decibels on a few projects every year. So now I think over a dozen projects cumulatively. And that is where the magic really happens. I mean, that's where we're able to really understand and corroborate the output KPIs that we have and say, okay, we see this many loans. What does that actually mean? Who are those loans
Mm-hmm.
going to? Are their quality of lives improving? Are they able to grow their businesses? Are they able to hire new people? I mean, that's what we really want to know. So once again, not a super direct answer, but I hope the message is that precision is important, but without context, it means nothing.
Absolutely, absolutely true. Just because you measure it doesn't mean it's relevant.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
100% agree.
Very top of mind as we are working on our annual reporting right now,
Super.
looking at a lot of metrics.
Well, if you want our thoughts on that, we're always happy to give you our perspective.
Great.
Kristin, could I ask you for a little bit of just uh, commentary around the relationship with IEL and just the real nuts and bolts of working with us?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the verification itself,
No, I mean literally like day to day. How was it working with the team?
it was incredibly pleasant, very collaborative, as I mentioned. Yeah, working with IEL is a very collaborative partner, and I feel like the work that you're doing, it's clear that there's not a selfish motivation there. It's really intended to better connect the dots between performance and purpose, which is something that is really key to Quona's mission. And so when I learned about what you were trying to build and integrating financial performance while also, assessing impact, authenticity, and rigor, I thought it was brilliant.
Super. Thank you. Love it.
Okay.
So Kristin, this has been really informative. Could you take a minute and tell us about the theory of change at Quona and how you developed it and then how you execute on it?
100%. So Quona is investing in leading companies that are reshaping financial services to meet the everyday needs of underserved communities and MSMEs in emerging markets. We're investing in models like payments, infrastructure, MSME finance, consumer finance, challenger banking, embedded finance, and many more. We do not see, financial inclusion as an end in itself, but rather as a means to an end to drive reduced inequality, increased business growth, increased financial resilience, et cetera. So it's really more of a tool to support some of these much broader goals like the sustainable development goals that are really at the heart and soul of what impact should be trying to do.
Beautiful. Monica, one of the issues that doesn't get discussed enough, I think, is the impact at exit and how you think about an exit as it reflects not only upon your financial performance, but also the impact objectives of your portfolio. Could you talk a little bit about that?
100%. So I think it's very important to understand exits in impact investing One, that they're happening. They look different than how exits happen in mainstream or developed markets, but it's really important to understand the nuance of them and to talk about what success looks like so we continue growing realizations in our field. So, number one, exits in our field often involve different types of transactions, not just IPOs or mergers and acquisitions, which happen very commonly. It's the most common type of form in early and growth stage equity investing, but also in terms of secondary investments. So there are funds and investors that feel much more comfortable investing in the later stage. And so they want to, and also they want to provide continuity. So earlier, Kristin described that impact and how we measure it. Sometimes there is a time frame, especially if you think about the broader ecosystem and indirect impact that could happen in terms of people employed, capital drawn to a specific market, new demonstration effects. So you create versions of a certain product or service that get copied, which is beneficial for the consumer. All of these things sometimes work in the 10-year time frame that most investors like Quona operate in, but sometimes they take longer. And so because we are very committed to delivering exits in a time frame to our investors, we pursue like-minded investors that sometimes will buy out our position so we can give liquidity to our existing and original backers while allowing the company to continue. An example that we're super excited about, the first investment of our fund two was called Contabilize. It is an accounting software as a service platform in Brazil. So you can think of Quicken and just think about how something as simple as Quicken allowed a small business that maybe couldn't afford an accountant, but really wanted to formalize its books, really had aspirations to grow, and knowing that you can't keep receipts in the shoebox and grow very well. So this idea of using digital technology to clean up your financial controls and management and also access bank lending, which is what Contabilize helps do. That company not only has been profitable for the last 5 years, it's grown consistently. It's a beautiful company. Again, using a model that we've seen analogs for in other markets, operating in Brazil, serving small businesses. We had 2 investors come in and bid for a piece of our share. And so even though we actually see continued growth and profitability, we actually sold a piece of our investment, not only because we could provide liquidity to our LPs, to our investors, which is important, but because those 2 investors were actually committed to the very growth rate, the very business model, and what they could provide in terms of resources would actually allow Contabilize to scale to that next level. So this notion of creating not only impact in the short term, but ensuring its continuity and institutionalizing these models in these economic environments is critically important. And in the report that Kristin mentioned earlier, we do an impact report every year. We actually do a highlight on Contabilize, as well as some of the other frameworks she described about modeling or mapping our portfolio on those ABCs of impact, really differentiating those ones that she mentioned where there is a positive correlation between financial performance and impact performance, as well as mapping others that are on that journey. So again, all of these points, really you have to really dig in and analyze to know that 1, exits happen, and 2, that you can maintain impact even as you exit the firm.
Can I add to that too?
Sure.
Because responsible exits is a huge focus right now. It's one of the 7 or one of the impact principles, and it's an area that we've been working on. We've always had a strong thesis around exits. We've always been very proactive around exits. It's always been really core to the way that we invest. We have to have a very clear path to exit to invest in a company. And one of the things we've been working on over the past year is refining and becoming more explicit around the way we think about impact at exits. And one of the pieces of feedback and one of the ways we've been collaborative with the industry is helping them really understand and and understand the nuance around how investors across different asset classes can realistically approach impact throughout the life cycle of their investment. For Quona, given where we're investing, which is typically pre-Series A, Series A rounds, occasionally seed, our strongest time of influence is at the time of investment and the surrounding years when we're on the board. And so we view responsible exits and our approach to exits and impact at exit as a full life cycle approach, where in order to have a strong impact at exit, we have to be making an investment in a company where impact is core to the business that they are doing. And we have to be clear from the beginning what those exit prospects are and how the impact might be affected later on. So it's that our thinking around exits starts from the beginning.
It's fantastic. You guys really are the gold standard.
It's very kind.
Really.
Thank you.
That's all I've got in terms of questions today. This has been, I mean, it was great working with you guys. This has been equally fun. So thank you. Would you indulge us in a speed round of off content questions so we could sort of lighten it up?
Sure.
So, okay. Favorite food you can't cook yourself?
Sushi.
I would probably agree. Sushi or like really good ramen.
Favorite food you do cook yourself?
I make Thai food.
I'm from the South. I make really good mac and cheese.
Nice. Nice. Favorite musician?
Say Fleetwood Mac.
Monica and I actually share an interest in this band. It's called Lake Street Dive.
Oh,
They're awesome. Would recommend.
yes, I've seen them live.
They're so fun.
Yes, they are fun. A lot of fun. And my daughter is a musician and a singer, so she's really into it.
Of course. Yeah.
Last speed round question. If there was one thing you could change in this world, it would be what?
Civic dialogue.
Poverty.
Amen to both. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
That's
really
fun.
enjoyed
Thank
this.
you.
Wonderful.